My grandmother left me $170,000. I found out 11 years after she died. I found out because my mother got sick and I flew home to Cincinnati to help. And on a Wednesday afternoon, I was organizing her filing cabinet while she slept. And at the back of a manila folder labeled Mom Estate, I found a document I had been told in various gentle ways did not contain anything worth reading. I am a fellow of the Casualty Actuarial Society. I have spent 15 years calculating the exact probability and cost of things going catastrophically wrong. I sat down at my mother's kitchen table, opened that document, and read it from the first page to the last. By page 8, I had found the provision about the trust. By page 14, I had found the first distribution record. By the time I reached the end, I had found 14 distribution records, all going to the same person, none going to me, totaling $595,000 from an account my grandmother had left to be split equally between two grandchildren. I did not cry. I opened my laptop. I opened a new spreadsheet. I started counting. Before I tell you what that number became after 11 years of compound interest, and what happened in a conference room when I put that spreadsheet on a table in front of the people who thought I'd never find it. If the story is reaching you at the right time, please like and subscribe. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I read every comment. My name is Claire Okafor. I'm 36 years old. I work in Chicago, Illinois. My job is to calculate the exact financial cost of disaster before it happens, so that the people paying me know what they are actually risking. I have done this for other people for 15 years. The week I found my grandmother's trust document, I did it for myself for the first time. This is that story. I grew up learning two things at the same time in the same house from two people who never once sat down and decided to teach them to me. The first thing, what it costs when something goes wrong. My father, Emeka Okafor, came to the United States from Nigeria in 1981 with an engineering degree and the specific ambition of a man who understood that the gap between where he was and where he needed to be was a problem to be solved through precision, not hoping. He was methodical in a way that was not coldness. It was attention. He paid attention to things other people let slide. He kept records. He checked the math. He never signed anything he hadn't read. He died when I was 15. Heart attack. No warning, no buildup, no second chance. He went to work on a Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon, my mother was in a hospital waiting room being told things no one should have to be told alone. I was at school when it happened. I came home to a house that felt like the air had changed density. My father was 47. The second thing I learned, what it costs when you carry something alone. My mother, Carol, second generation Irish American, practical, sharp. The kind of woman who balanced the household budget in a spiral notebook every Sunday and was finished before the coffee cooled. Became a different version of herself after my father died. Not worse, harder in the places that had been soft, softer in the places that had been hard. She went back to work full time. She managed. She did not complain. She kept the spiral notebook. She also, I understood much later, started deferring to other people in ways she hadn't before, as if losing my father had taken something of her own authority with it, as if the person who had checked her math was gone, and without him, she trusted other people's numbers more than her own. I'm my father's daughter. I checked the math. We were two kids, my brother Marcus, 3 years older, and me. Marcus had my father's face and my mother's stubbornness, and neither of their discipline. He moved through the world on charm and proximity, always near the right people, always adjacent to the right opportunity, perpetually arriving somewhere just as the thing he was supposed to have done earlier was becoming a problem that someone else would have to absorb. He was not a bad person. He was a person who had learned very early that the consequences of his choices had a habit of distributing themselves among the people around him rather than landing squarely on him. I had learned something different. My grandmother, Nora Walsh, my mother's mother, was the one person in my family who looked at me and saw not a girl who was being serious and quiet, but a person who was paying attention to things that mattered. She was 76 when my father died. She drove from Columbus to Cincinnati the same night it happened and sat with us for 4 days. She didn't hover. She didn't fill silences with noise. She made food and she sat and she let the grief be what it was without trying to manage it into a more comfortable shape. On the morning she left, she sat next to me on the front steps. "You're going to be okay," she said, not as a comfort, as an assessment. "How do you know?" I asked. "Because you're the kind of person who figures things out," she said, "and figuring things out is the hardest skill there is." I thought about that for a long time. When I was 16, a teacher named Mr. Donovan handed me a book about actuarial science and said, "I think this is your language." He was right. The work, probability theory, statistical modeling, the mathematics of uncertainty felt like the formal version of what I had been doing in my head since I was a child, calculating what could go wrong, pricing the cost, building the model that told you the truth before the truth arrived. I went to Ohio State on a partial scholarship and a work-study job and student loans I paid off in 4 years. I got into a graduate actuarial program in Chicago. I started the fellowship exams, 10 exams, 50% failure rate on each, 7 to 10 years to complete the track for most people. I completed them in 6. I did not celebrate loudly. My grandmother called me the morning after I received my final certification letter. "Claire," she said. Her voice was 81 years old and completely clear. "Hi, Grandma. You passed all of them?" "All of them," I said. There was a pause on the line. "You count things other people are afraid to count," she said. "That's the most important job there is." She died 14 months later. And that is where the story really begins. My grandmother's estate was not large by any standard that would impress anyone. She had a house in Columbus, 3 bedrooms, a garden she'd maintained herself until she was 79. 40 years of accumulated furniture and photographs and the specific objects that accumulate in a life lived carefully in one place. She had a savings account, and she had a brokerage account that my grandfather had opened in the 1970s, and which she had with the financial conservatism of her generation and the specific wisdom of someone who had watched other people panic their way through every market fluctuation since 1973. Simply left alone. Yeah, she did not check it daily. She did not adjust it seasonally. She rolled it into index funds every decade and let compound interest do what compound interest does when you leave it alone for 40 years. By the time she died in the autumn of 2012, that brokerage account had grown to $340,000. She also had a trust, the Walsh Family Trust, prepared in 2007 by an estate attorney in Columbus, had 2 primary provisions. The house would pass jointly to her 2 daughters, my mother, Carol, and my aunt, Renata. The brokerage account would be held in trust for her grandchildren, Marcus Okafor and Claire Okafor, in equal shares, accessible at age 25 or upon completion of a 4-year degree, whichever came first. I know this because I read the trust document in 2023. I know this because in 2012, at the family dinner after my grandmother's funeral, when I was 24 years old and had just passed my 4th actuarial exam and was eating a plate of food I couldn't taste, my Aunt Renata sat at the head of the table and said, without anyone having asked, "There's a trust. The attorney is handling everything. It's all straightforward. Nothing to worry about." And I had thought, in the specific way that certain instincts fire before the reasoning catches up, That's a preemption, not a reassurance. And I had asked, well, what's in the trust? And Renata had said, the attorney will handle it. And my mother had said, Claire, not today. And Marcus had been eating a dinner roll and had no visible questions at all. And I had let it go. For 11 years, I let it go. Not completely. It surfaced occasionally, the way an unresolved variable surfaces when you're building a model and something in the output doesn't balance. In 2015, I called the attorney's office. They said the records were private and couldn't be discussed without authorization. I made a note. I moved on. I told myself there was probably not much in it because that's what my mother had told me, and I had no reason then to understand that my mother had been told what to say. I worked. I passed exams. I built a career and a life and a financial position that I managed with the precision of someone who does not leave things to hope. I was fine. I had built myself into someone who would be fine without any of it. That fact would matter later. The first time, March 2015, Marcus's condo. My brother called me on a Sunday in March, 3 years after our grandmother's death. He had found a condo, 2 bedrooms, Clintonville neighborhood, a good deal by his accounting, a stretch by anyone else's. My debt to income is a problem, he said. The bank said with a cosigner, the rate drops and I qualify. It's just for the paperwork. I'll make every payment. Marcus, I said. Co-signing means if you miss a payment, it comes to my credit report. My name is on the debt. I know, he said, but I won't miss payments. I have the job. I have the income. I just don't have the history yet. You're 30 years old, I said. You should have history. Claire, he said, with the exact tone of someone who has calculated that patience will work where reason won't. I need this. I've been renting since I was 22. I need to build something. I thought about my father who had rented until he'd saved enough to buy outright. I thought about the jar on the kitchen counter. I thought about the spiral notebook. Then I thought about Marcus at my grandmother's funeral, asking me quietly if I knew how to reach the attorney handling the estate. Why did you want the attorney's information? I asked him now. A beat of silence, very small. I wanted to know if there was anything left, he said. From Grandma. Was there? I said. The attorney said it had been distributed, he said. Nothing left. I looked at the phone. I'll co-sign, I said. I co-signed. 2 years later, Marcus sold the condo at a profit. He put the money into a restaurant venture with a friend. I was not told about the profit. I was not offered any consideration for having enabled the purchase. I removed myself from the loan when he refinanced and did not mention it again. I updated my document the second time. November 2016. The emergency that wasn't. My mother called on a Tuesday evening. The furnace went, she said. The whole unit, they said it needs to be replaced. November, Claire. I can't go into winter without heat. How much? I asked. The estimate is $3,800, she said. I have some in savings, but not enough. I was going to see if you could cover the gap. How much is the gap? I asked. $2,000, she said. I transferred $2,000 that night. A month later, visiting for the holidays, I looked at the furnace room. The unit was new. The installation was clean. The paperwork on the counter showed a total cost of $3,200. I did the math. My mother had $1,200 in savings that she'd applied, plus my $2,000. She had said she could only cover some of it. $1,200 was more than some. I did not say anything. I updated my document. The third time. September 2019, Marcus in the restaurant. The restaurant was in Grandview Heights, Italian-American, mid-range price point, the kind of place that needs 18 months of stable operation before it breaks even on build-out costs. It lasted 14 months. Marcus called me 2 weeks before it closed. I need help, he said. Not a lot. Just to get through the last couple months of the lease. If I break it now, there are penalties. If I can cover it until the natural end, I walk away clean. How much is the lease? I asked. Monthly is $4,000, he said. 2 months, $8,000. Total. Marcus, I said, I can't do 8,000. I'm not asking for all of it, he said quickly. Whatever you can. Even half. I can find the rest. I thought about the restaurant. I thought about the condo. I thought about $2,000 for a furnace gap that wasn't quite the size my mother had indicated. I thought about the specific arithmetic of being the reliable one. 4,000, I said. That's half. That's what I can do. Thank you, he said. I'll pay this back. He has not paid it back. Well, I updated my document. 2015 to 2019 column, $7,200, not counting the co-sign years. This was not by itself a pattern that would end families. This was a pattern that would matter when I found the trust document 4 years later and understood that the arithmetic of what I'd been giving and what I'd been denied was not a coincidence. It was a system. The fourth time. 2020, the one I finally said no to. My mother called in August, pandemic summer, when everyone was recalculating everything. I've been thinking about the house, she said. I want to make some updates. The kitchen needs work. The bathroom on the second floor. I talked to a contractor. Okay, I said. It's about 15,000, she said. I was wondering if you could help with some of it. I looked at my spreadsheet. I thought about the furnace gap. I thought about the restaurant. I thought about 11 years of being told there wasn't much in the trust. Mom, I said, I've been helping with things for a long time. I need to stop for a while. Silence. I'm not asking for all of it, she said. Just, I know it, I said, and I know you need it. But I've been the person who covers things for years, and I haven't been able to build the way I need to. I'm saying no. Claire, she said. Her voice had a specific quality I had learned over the years. Not quite hurt, not quite reproach, something that lived in the space between. Your brother is having a hard time. I am having a hard time. You are the one in the good position. I put myself in the good position, I said. Carefully, over years. That position isn't an accident. I need to protect it. She did not argue further. She also did not speak to me easily for the rest of that year. I did not update my document that time. I had nothing to add, but I thought about what she'd said. You are the one in the good position. I thought about how that sentence had been handed to me my entire adult life. Every time there was something to be covered, as though my stability were a resource the family could draw on without authorization because I was stable enough to absorb the withdrawal. I thought about that for a long time. My mother's diagnosis came in January of 2023. A mass, early stage, requiring surgery and a period of recovery. The prognosis was good. The logistics were not. She lived alone, had no one local to coordinate her care, and the recovery would take 6 to 8 weeks of close support. I cleared my calendar. I flew to Cincinnati. For 6 weeks, I managed her medications, her appointments, her insurance claims, her grocery orders, her follow-up visits. I cooked, I organized, I did what I had been doing in one form or another since my father died 21 years earlier. I figured things out. On a Wednesday afternoon in the 4th week while my mother slept, I was organizing her filing cabinet, not looking for anything specific. Organizing is what I do when I need to be useful, and there is nothing requiring immediate action. It is also, as it turns out, what you need to be doing when the document that changes everything is at the back of a folder in the 3rd drawer. The folder was labeled Mom, estate in my mother's handwriting. Inside, some paperwork from my grandfather's death in 1998, an old insurance policy, a card from a florist, and at the back, folded once, slightly soft at the creases from years of being opened and closed, the Walsh Family Trust. 22 pages. I took it to the kitchen table. I opened it. By page 4, I had confirmed the structure. House to the daughters, brokerage account to the grandchildren, equal shares. By page 6, I had found the specific language: equal distribution, no provision for trustee discretion to deviate from equal allocation without written consent of both beneficiaries. By page 8, I had found the distribution schedule. By page 10, I had found the first record. January 2013, $42,500. Payable to Marcus Okafor. July 2013, $42,500. Payable to Marcus Okafor. January 2014, $42,500. Payable to Marcus Okafor. I turned pages every 6 months without exception from January 2013 through July 2019. $42,500 to Marcus. 14 distributions. Total $595,000. Distributions to Claire Okafor, 0. I read every page twice. I read the beneficiary provision 3 times. I checked the dates of the distributions against the date my grandmother died and the date I turned 25, which was the trigger date in the trust document. My 25th birthday was March 2012. My grandmother died in October 2012. The first distribution was January 2013, 4 months after her death. I had been eligible for distributions from the moment the trust funded. I had received nothing. I sat at my mother's kitchen table for a long time. Outside, the street was the same street it had always been. The same trees, the same distances between houses, the same afternoon light at the same angle. Inside, the kitchen smelled like the same lavender dish soap my mother had used since I was in middle school. My father's photo was on the refrigerator, the one from their first anniversary, where he was laughing at something she'd said. I opened my laptop. I opened a new spreadsheet. I titled it Walsh Trust Actual Numbers, column A, category, column B, amount, column C, notes. Row 1, trust principal, my share, $170,000 per trust document, equal split of $340,000 account. Row 2, total distributions to Marcus, $595,000 per distribution records, 14 payments of $42,500 from January 2013 to July 2019. Row 3, distributions to me, $0. Row 4, shortfall, principal only, $170,000. Then I built the second section. I know the time value of money the way most people know their own phone numbers, automatically, precisely, without effort. The present value of a deferred cash flow is not an abstraction. It is a real number. It represents what you actually lost, not just what was taken. If $170,000 had been invested at my 25th birthday in the same index funds my grandfather had originally used at the S&P 500's average annual return over the subsequent 11 years, approximately 10.4%, accounting for the full period through 2023. The value in 2023 would be approximately $489,000. I ran the calculation 3 times. The output was consistent. Row 5, present value of foregone principal at 10.4% annually, 11 years. $489,000. I looked at that number for a moment. Then I added one more row. Row 6, unauthorized excess distributions to Marcus. Distributions beyond his 50% share, $425,000. I saved the spreadsheet. Then I opened a second tab. I titled it What Marcus Bought. I had watched my brother's life from a distance for 11 years. I had co-signed his mortgage. I had helped cover his restaurant. I had watched him move through his 30s with a financial stability that never quite matched the work he was putting in. I had chalked it up to luck, to timing, to the possibility that I simply didn't have full visibility into his income. Now, I ran a different model. 2013 condo purchase, Clintonville, $187,000. Down payment at 20%, $37,400. First distribution from trust, $42,500. January 2013. 2016. New car, Honda Accord, approximately $28,000. Total distributions to that point, $170,000. 2018. Restaurant build-out investment, approximately $60,000, according to a conversation Marcus had with me once, where he'd been proud about putting real money into it. 2019, final restaurant lease period, $8,000 that he told me he found a way to cover after I gave him half. I looked at the column. Every major financial event in Marcus's adult life had occurred within 6 months of a trust distribution. The timing was not a coincidence. The timing was the calendar. I saved the spreadsheet. I closed the laptop. I went to check on my mother. She was asleep. Her breathing was even. The oxygen saturation monitor on her finger read 98%. Her color was good. I straightened her blanket. I stood in the doorway for a moment. Then I went back to the kitchen, sat at the table, and stared at the manila folder until the afternoon light changed. The trust attorney's name was Sandra Park. I found her through a referral from a colleague at work whose husband had gone through a contested estate 2 years earlier. She worked on the 42nd floor of a building in the Loop with a view of Lake Michigan that on clear days looked implausible, like someone had hung a photograph of water behind her window. She had been doing trust and estate litigation for 26 years. She had the specific quality of someone who has heard every configuration of family financial betrayal and has decided, after a certain number of years, that the appropriate response is not outrage, but precision. I brought 3 things to our first meeting. The Walsh Family Trust document, the distribution records, all 14, my spreadsheet printed on 2 pages, labeled in my own handwriting. I set them on her conference table in the order I'd found them. She read. She was a fast and thorough reader, the kind who processes a document fully before speaking, rather than reading and reacting simultaneously. When she finished the distribution records, she looked at the spreadsheet. She was quiet for a moment. The present value calculation, she said. You ran this yourself. Yes, I said. At 10.4% annually. The S&P 500 saw average for the 11-year period from March 2012 through March 2023. It's high. I said, I also have it at 9% and 11% for a range if needed. She looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. You're an actuary, she said. Fellow of the Casualty Actuarial Society. I said, I am 15 years. These numbers will be difficult to argue with, she said. I know, I said. She leaned back. Here's what you're looking at, she said. The trust named 2 equal beneficiaries. Distributions were made exclusively to 1. The trust document contains no provision granting the trustee, your aunt, discretion to deviate from equal distribution without written consent from both beneficiaries. That's a breach of fiduciary duty. What does that mean in practice? I asked. It means your aunt, as trustee, was legally obligated to distribute equally, she said. It means she distributed exclusively to 1 beneficiary for 6.5 years. It means the account was drawn down to 0, actually to a deficit, given the total distributed exceeded the original principal, without ever once notifying you, the co-beneficiary, of your rights. And my brother, I said. Your brother received distributions he either knew or should have known were not authorized in full, she said carefully. His exposure depends on what he knew and when. Oh, what about my mother? I said. Sandra's expression shifted slightly, not dramatically. The way a number shifts in a model when a variable changes. What do you know about your mother's involvement? She asked. Nothing yet, I said. That's part of what I need to know. Before we file anything, she said, we need to establish what each person knew and when. Your aunt was the trustee. She had full access and full authority and full legal responsibility. Your brother was the recipient. Your mother's role is less clear. She paused. The most common pattern in a case like this, she said, is a trustee who makes a unilateral decision to prioritize one beneficiary and other family members who either know and say nothing or are told just enough to comply without asking questions. Which of those is worse? I asked. She considered. They're different kinds of wrong, she said. One is an act, the other is a silence. I understood that distinction very well. I need the trust account statements, Sandra said. Annual reports, correspondence between your aunt and the financial institution. As a named beneficiary, you have a legal right to an accounting. How do we get that? I said. A formal demand letter, she said. Statutory deadline for response. If they don't comply, we petition. She looked at me. I want to be transparent about one thing, she said. Cases like this are not fast. The discovery process will expose every financial decision your aunt and your brother have made for over a decade. By the time we're done, everything will be on a table. I know, I said. Your family will not be the same after, she said. My family, I said, has not been what I thought it was since I sat at my mother's kitchen table and read a document that told me 11 years of the truth they'd decided I didn't need to know. She nodded once. Okay, she said, let's start. The hardest conversation was not with Renata. It was not with Marcus. It was on a Tuesday evening in May, 6 weeks after my mother's surgery, when she was strong enough to sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and the particular stillness of a woman who's been waiting for something she can feel approaching. I set the trust document on the table. I set the distribution records beside it. I set my spreadsheet in the center. She looked at all three for a long moment before she touched anything. Then she put both hands around her mug and looked at me. You found it, she said. It wasn't a question. You knew, I said. She didn't answer immediately. She looked at the table. How much did you know? I said. She exhaled. Renata told me, she said. After the first distribution went out, the January after Mom died. She told you she was only distributing to Marcus? I said. She said Marcus needed it more, my mother said. She said you had your career, your salary, you were going to be fine. She said Mom would have wanted him to have stability. She paused. She was very certain about it. And you agreed, I said. I didn't. She stopped, started again, slower. I didn't say yes. I didn't sign anything. I told her it was her responsibility as trustee, and I didn't want to be involved. That's the same as saying yes, I said. She closed her eyes. I know, she said very quietly. You told me there wasn't much in the trust, I said. Renata asked me to, she said. She said if you knew about the distributions, you'd make it complicated. She said you'd run the numbers and cause problems. She looked at me then, directly. She meant it as a warning. I should have heard it as a description of exactly what I should have let you do. I looked at my mother, the woman who had balanced a budget to the cent in a spiral notebook every Sunday for 20 years. The woman who had raised me on the principle that precision was the highest form of respect for reality. Why didn't you tell me? I said. She was quiet for a long time. You were always fine, she said. That sounds terrible now. I know it sounds terrible, but every time there was a question about money, about who needed help, your name never came up because you never needed it. Marcus needed it every single time, and you... She stopped. I had built myself to not need it, I said. Yes, she said. Mom, I said, that's not the same thing as not deserving it. She put her face in her hands. I waited. I know, she said from behind her hands. I knew it then. It was easier to let Renata handle it. She was the trustee. She was so certain, and you were so capable. She looked up. I'm ashamed of the logic. I know that's not an excuse. It's not, I said. Are you going to court? She asked. Yes, I said. She nodded once, slow. I'll cooperate, she said. Whatever Sandra needs. I'll tell her everything I know when I knew it, what Renata said to me. Thank you, I said. We sat at the kitchen table for a while after that, not talking. Outside, it was getting dark. The same street, the same trees. My father's photograph on the refrigerator. I thought about what Renata had said. She'll run the numbers and cause problems. She was right about the first part. She was wrong about the second. Running the numbers wasn't causing a problem. Running the numbers was finding one that already existed. The financial institution responded to Sandra's demand letter in 3 weeks. They produced 11 years trust account statements, transaction records, and annual trustee reports. All of it arrived in a digital packet that I read in one sitting at my kitchen table in Chicago, the same way I read any complex document, from the first page to the last, with a legal pad beside me and a pen in my hand. What the records showed. The brokerage account had been worth $338,470 at the time of the trust's funding in November 2012. The first distribution went out in January 2013. $42,500 to Marcus. The distributions continued every 6 months, without fail, without variation in amount, for 14 rounds. By July 2019, the account was fully depleted. The final distribution of $42,500 had been made from a balance of $46,320 or the remaining funds after the account had spent 6 years being drawn down exclusively from one side. In the annual trustee reports, filed each year with the trust's financial institution, there was a line for second beneficiary distribution. For 11 years, that line read, not applicable, distribution deferred pending beneficiary election. I had never made any such election. I had never been told I needed to make any such election. The beneficiary election language was not in the trust document. It had been invented. I sat with that for a moment. Then I picked up my phone and called Sandra. I have the records, I said. What did you find? She said. She created a fictional deferral election, I said, like in the annual trustee reports. She wrote that I had deferred my distributions pending a beneficiary election that isn't mentioned anywhere in the trust document. That's not an oversight. That's a mechanism. She built a paper record to explain after the fact why I hadn't received anything. Silence on the line. Sandra, I said. That's not just breach of fiduciary duty. No, she said quietly. That's fraud. That's what I calculated, I said. She called me back within an hour. I've spoken to an attorney I trust who handles fraud cases, she said. We need to make a decision about whether we pursue this civilly, criminally, or both. The civil case is strong and faster. The criminal referral is longer and less certain of outcome. What's your recommendation? I said. Civil mediation first, she said. With the explicit understanding that if mediation fails, we go to trial and simultaneously refer the fraud evidence to the DA's office. That way, they understand the full exposure before they decide whether to settle. How long does mediation take? I asked. If they're smart, one day, she said. Set it up, I said. And then... The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday in September at a downtown Chicago law office. Neutral ground, conference room B, a long table with water pitchers and a view of a parking structure. Renata arrived with her attorney, a man named Gerald, with the defensive carriage of someone who had read our pre-mediation brief and recognized it as something he could not argue out of on the merits. Marcus arrived separately with his own attorney, which told me everything I needed to know about the current state of their alignment. The mediator was a woman named Ellen Cho, 62, former circuit court judge. The specific calm of someone who has spent 30 years watching families destroy themselves over money and has decided that her role is to shorten the process, not mourn it. My mother was not present in the room. She had given a written statement to Sandra, 8 pages, covering everything from the first phone call after the funeral to the instruction to tell me there was nothing significant in the trust. The statement was in Sandra's folder. It would be referenced if needed. Referenced. I sat next to Sandra. On the table in front of me, one folder. Inside, the trust document, the distribution records, the account statements, the fraudulent trustee reports with the invented deferral language highlighted in yellow, and my spreadsheet, 2 pages. Clean, the final row in a slightly larger font. Present value of Claire Okafor's rightful trust distribution, including foregone investment return at a conservative 10.4% annually over 11 years, $489,000. Ellen Cho opened the session with the standard language, purpose, process, confidentiality, ground rules. Then she looked at both sides and said, Ms. Park, you have brought this claim. Would you like to open? Sandra put my spreadsheet on the table. She slid a copy to each side. The Walsh family trust document, she said, specifies equal distribution between 2 named beneficiaries. Between January 2013 and July 2019, 14 distributions totaling $595,000 were made to one beneficiary. 0 distributions were made to the other. She paused. The annual trustee reports filed during this period contain a notation indicating that the second beneficiary had deferred her distributions pending an election. That language does not appear in the trust document. It does not correspond to any communication from the second beneficiary. It was fabricated. Gerald, that's a significant characterization. It's a precise one, Sandra said. We have the trust document. We have the annual reports. We have 11 years of account statements. The notation appears in the trustee's own handwriting. There's no corresponding record of any communication with my client about a deferral election because no such communication ever occurred. Silence. The bottom number on the spreadsheet, Sandra continued, represents the present value of my client's principal share plus the opportunity cost of 11 years of foregone investment. My client is a fellow of the Casualty Actuarial Society with 15 years of professional experience in exactly this kind of calculation. The methodology is documented, conservative, and will withstand scrutiny. She looked at the room. If this proceeds to civil trial, she said, we will seek the full present value figure plus trustee fees for breach of fiduciary duty plus punitive damages. Simultaneously, we will refer the fabricated trustee report records to the Cook County District Attorney's Office as evidence of fraud. The discovery process will require full disclosure of every financial account and transaction made by both your clients for the relevant period. Gerald leaned toward Renata. Renata was looking at the spreadsheet. Marcus was looking at the table. We would like, Sandra said, to resolve this today for everyone's benefit. Ellen Cho. Mr. Gerald, would your client like a recess? 20 minutes? When they came back, Gerald named a number. It was 61% of our figure. Sandra looked at me. I looked at the spreadsheet. That's $298,290, I said quietly to Sandra, against a documented claim of $489,000. Correct, she said. We're not at 61%, she said to the room. What followed was 2 hours of the specific back and forth that happens when one side has the documents and the other side has the exposure, and both sides are trying to find the number that ends the day. At 70%, I shook my head. At 78%, I shook my head. At 85%, Sandra looked at me. I thought about my grandmother. You count things other people are afraid to count. I thought about what 85% meant in real numbers. $415,650. I thought about what the alternative meant. 18 months of litigation, discovery, a criminal referral, Every transaction Marcus had made for 11 years on a table in a courtroom, my mother's written statement entered into the public record. I thought about my father's photograph on my mother's refrigerator. 88, I said. Sandra, my client is at 88%. Gerald conferred with Renata, then with Marcus's attorney. 15 minutes. 88, Gerald said. The settlement agreement was signed at 4:52 p.m. The amount, $430,320. I did not feel what I expected to feel when I signed it. I felt the specific quiet of a model that has reached its final output. The calculation is complete. The number is real. The work is done. I signed. I closed the folder. I stood up and shook Ellen Cho's hand. She looked at me for a moment. You were very calm in there, she said. I price disaster for a living, I said. The pricing is the calm part. She smiled slightly. The living with it, she said, is the other part. Yes, I said, I know. Well, the settlement deposited in October. I didn't celebrate. I updated my financial model, the one I maintained for my own accounts, the way my mother maintained her spiral notebook, with the same Sunday ritual, the same precision, the same commitment to knowing exactly where every number stands. I reallocated the funds across 4 accounts. The methodology was not complicated. It was the same methodology I'd have used if I'd received the money at 25, adjusted for where I was at 36, 11 years later. With 11 years of additional context about what I actually wanted my financial life to look like, I called Sandra the morning after the funds cleared. It's done, I said. Yes, she said, and how do you feel? I thought about that. Accurate, I said. She laughed briefly. That's an actuary's answer. It's an honest one, I said. For 11 years, I had an understanding of my own financial position that was wrong. Not wrong because of anything I did. Wrong because the correct information was withheld. Now, the number is right. In the family, she said. That's a different calculation, I said. It's all my mother and I speak on the phone every Sunday. The calls are shorter than they used to be. More careful. We talk about her health, which continues to improve. We talk about the garden, which she returned to in the spring. We talk about her spiral notebook, which I have asked her to leave me when she dies. Not for the money, of which there is not much, but for the evidence of a life managed with precision and honesty, which I want to keep. We do not talk about the trust. We talked about it once in full at the kitchen table in May. I said what I needed to say. She heard it. She said what she was capable of saying. I heard that. We are not what we were before. We are something more accurate. Marcus sent me a message in November. I want to talk when you're ready. I know that might be never. I understand if it is. I have not responded. Not because I won't. Because ready is a threshold condition, and I have not yet determined what the threshold actually is. When I know, I will tell him. That is the most honest thing I can offer. Renata has not contacted me. I don't expect her to. I expect her to have learned from the mediation that contact is not in her interest. That is a reasonable calculation. I respect reasonable calculations even when I don't respect the person making them. And I still have the spreadsheet. I have it in a folder in my cloud storage between tax documents and insurance policies. The file name is Walsh Trust. Actual numbers.xlsx. I open it sometimes, not often, not to feel the anger again. I've found that anger, for me, is a phase of the calculation rather than a permanent state. Once the number is correct, the anger has nothing left to do. I open it to remember what the number was before I found the document, what I thought I had, what I had actually been given. 0 for 11 years while a different column filled up. I open it to remember that the difference between those two numbers is not an abstraction. It is $489,000. It is a real amount of real money that represents real time, mine, invested at the right intervals, in the right instruments, starting at the right age. Time is the variable that matters most in any compound growth model. You cannot recover lost time. You can only make accurate decisions with the time that remains. My grandmother used to say, "You count things other people are afraid to count." I have thought about that sentence differently since the kitchen table. I used to hear it as a compliment about my skill. Now I hear it as a description of a responsibility. The things people are afraid to count are usually the things most worth counting. The avoided number, the unbalanced column, the question that nobody wants to ask because the answer will require someone to do something uncomfortable. In my professional life, I count those things for insurance companies and corporations and institutions that need to know their actual exposure before disaster arrives. In my personal life, I spent 11 years not counting the thing I was most afraid to count. The possibility that the people I loved had made a decision about what I deserved and had chosen not to tell me. I am not afraid of that number anymore. I have counted it. It is $489,000. It is also the knowledge that my stability, the thing my family cited every time as the reason I didn't need what was mine, was not a reason to exclude me. It was evidence of what I would have done with it if I'd had it. I will spend the rest of my financial life proving that. If you stayed for this, the whole thing, thank you, genuinely. Tell me in the comments, was there a number in your life that someone hoped you'd never calculate? A thing you were afraid to count because you already suspected what the answer would be. Count it, whatever it is. The truth of a number doesn't become less true because you look away from it, and it doesn't become more survivable because you don't count it. Then decide what to do with what you find. New stories every week. Subscribe if this one landed somewhere real. Take care of your own numbers first.